Good evening, everybody. My name is Chief Amachia Peto Buaru. We have a very interesting subject for this evening. The topic of discussion this evening is why you're still an amateur at developing spiritual abilities. This is a very important show. I'm going to tell you why it's important, because in this show, or in this short broadcast, I want to start giving some detailed information. I've got quite a few questions that have come in. And many of the questions are centered around, can you give some more detailed or give a little bit more detailed information concerning what spiritual medicine is? And I'm going to go ahead and do that. In addition to that, even further, I'm going to now start to discuss some of the components of spiritual medicine. So before we get started, let me go ahead. Let's see, make sure I get everything going here. I want to make sure everybody has their pens, pencils, paper together for any notes that they want to take, because I am going to start taking some questions that I see in the chat. But before that, let me just go ahead and get started with the traditional prayer, the traditional Bompaya, and then we will start the program. Okay. So before we begin, let me get some of the formal information out of the way. I am the founder of Bulana, of the International Indigenous Knowledge and Development Society. Our goal here at the International Indigenous Knowledge and Development Society is to observe, is to preserve, and to develop indigenous spiritual teachings for the Western world. Further, our goal is to maintain the continuity of the history, to maintain the continuity of the teachings and the spiritual knowledge of pre-colonial peoples and societies for future generations, which is our primary goal of IIKDS, the International Indigenous Knowledge and Development Society. And we are doing this in several different tiers, and one of those being the University of Traditional Sciences. So this is a university that has developed a structured educational path for people to learn and to gain knowledge about indigenous spiritual teachings. Even further, we have an association, the Association of Traditional Healers and Readers, which is also another platform that we have also developed in order to provide spiritual care in the community. Our goals are tiered in three different fashions. Number one, our goal is, in addition to what I've already stated previously, is to train a new era of traditional healers. Second is to provide spiritual care. And third is to develop strong communities. So that's just a small, brief background about IIKDS and our many different paths that we have developed in order to bring this rare indigenous spiritual teachings to you. So let's go ahead and get into the main topic of discussion for this evening, which is the reason why you're still an amateur at developing spiritual abilities. As I said previously in my previous show, Spiritual medicine is the key to developing a true connection to nature. Without this connection to nature, it's impossible to develop an authentic connection to nature. So how does that tie into what we're going to discuss today? Well, from our previous discussion, I described the fact that traditional medicine is a key, and that traditional medicine is a primary gate or opening to the dimensions or to the minds and the mentalities that exist in nature. So one of the things that I'm going to introduce here in this show is that the reason why people are still amateurs at developing spiritual abilities is because many people have not been taught that spiritual abilities not only exist as interior phenomena or an interior phenomenology, but spiritual abilities also exist in the exterior complexities or the dynamics that exist within ecology or within nature. And that's one of the things that I want to discuss this evening, and I want to introduce so that you guys can get a proper perspective of traditional medicine. What I want to introduce here is the fact that we'll go over a small review, and then I'll describe some of the detailed methodologies and principles behind Timbukata. Once again, Tima or Tima means traditional medicine, roots, herbs, leaves, sticks, barks, magic, and Bukata stands for the world, soul, and the spirit powers of the earth. This is a traditional or an indigenous practice that comes out of the northern regions of Ghana by a culture by the name of the Dagombas, or the kingdom of Dagbang. This is out of the northern regions of Ghana. Within these perspectives, it is taught for millions of years through empirical methods. And what I mean by that, through different empirical methods of experimentation, observation, direct and both indirect observation, modeling, and structuring, it has been found that spiritual abilities, their primary home does not exist within the contents of flesh and blood beings, meaning that their primary home exists in the various regions, locations, and points that exist within nature. And then with this knowledge, there has been a science of actually developing or cultivating or structuring, or even further, a word that may apply even better is engineering spiritual abilities. And this is what I call spiritual engineering or traditional spiritual engineering. The reason why people are still amateurs at developing spiritual abilities is because within the esoteric realm or within the new age realm, many of the paths to developing spiritual abilities have primarily just been internal. And what I mean by that is they've focused just on the interior mechanics or the interior dynamics of spiritual development. And this has been done through several different methods, whether it's chanting or whether it's mental visualization, or you know, some people call it journeying, you know, and so forth. And while these methods may be somewhat effective to some small degree, it's lacking in the totality or the holism of connecting to nature, because it is negating an ancient principle, which is also a traditional African or an indigenous African perspective. And it's an oxen that many people may have been familiar with through studying many systems in ancient Kemet or Egypt, which is as above, so below, or so below, as above, so within or so without. Meaning that as above, so below. So thus far, people have been dealing with half-truths, meaning that they've only been dealing with what's below instead of also dealing with what's above or without. Meaning that they've been only focusing on the interior dynamics and not focusing on the exterior dynamics of their abilities or spiritual powers that also permeate or reflect in the various aspects of nature. and becoming more specific here, within the traditional confines of traditional medicine, or Tima, and Bukata, the world, soul, and spirit powers of earth, we're specifically describing the components of spiritual abilities as they exist within various regions of the earth, as they exist in various locations on the earth, and then even further as they exist within specific points on the earth. It's very important for people to understand that. And then what we're describing here as landforms, or on as far as environments where these spiritual abilities exist on the earth, we're describing various landforms, various landscapes that exist on the earth. We're talking about in rivers, in mountain ranges, in plains or meadows. We're talking about in various rocky terrains. We're talking about in several different types of forests, whether you're dealing with deciduous forests, tropical forests. All of these different type of various landscapes all have different minds and have mentalities that project various life forms that are reflections of the minds and mentalities of what we call the Tigamani, or the gods of the land. And I always use this analogy, but this analogy I give for the specific purpose of describing the reality of the movement of the mind that exists in nature, and that it's not a stationary dynamic. So if you were to imagine a wheel, or a bicycle wheel, and you were to spin that bicycle wheel very quickly, in doing so, you would notice that those spokes on the wheel would then appear to be stationary, or they would almost become stationary in their appearance. However, the fact is that this wheel, or the spokes, are actually moving very quickly and very fast. Well, landscapes, different various locations, regions, and points on the earth are also moving very quickly, and so quickly they're moving that they are able to occupy more than one space at a time, including the spaces within your being. And many of the minds and the mentality, as this dynamics of this multifaceted movement exists, it projects what most people call personality, characteristics, traits, and so forth. But even further, it creates the dynamics of what most people have been describing as psychic abilities, or supernatural phenomena that has been known as superhuman or supernatural abilities. The reason why people are still amateurs when it comes to developing spiritual abilities is because they lack the knowledge of what we call the Tindanana, or the land kings, or the Tindana Paga, or Jinwaraba, which are land priests, land kings, with the knowledge that exists about the different minds, the mentalities, and the personalities that exist within nature. And it is this knowledge of the Tindanana, or the traditional priest, and the knowledge of the land, and the knowledge of the various regions, the knowledge of the various locations and points on the earth. This knowledge is able to be acquired, and then with this knowledge, the traditional Tindanana is able to go into the various landforms or landscapes, are able to go into these specific environments and to identify locations, or are able to identify various regions and points within these landforms that are the home of personality traits such as precognition, to identify the true home of what most people call as intuition, to identify the home of the minds and the mentalities and the various mental energy of what we call the Tigamani, or what we call the Wu Nonnam, which means the gods of our ancestors that exist in nature that project and give the perception through the mind as spiritual abilities or supernatural powers. This is important. Now, okay, so I'm looking here. Let me go ahead and answer this question I see that just came up in the chat room quick. It says, can you become a little bit more specific of how spiritual engineering is related to Tima Bukata? Okay, so with this knowledge, the traditional Tindanana is able, or we're able to collect various components such as plants, roots, sticks, different bark, different components of the life forms that exist within the environment, and we're able to create formulas. One of these formulas, which may be familiar to some, are what we call spiritual baths. Now, these spiritual baths are not like what most people may get from a store or some pre-made packaged spiritual bath. These are baths that are specifically engineered. These baths are specifically customized for individuals according to the remedy that's needed, or the ability that's needed, or that is sought after. So these spiritual baths are a combination of these various components. Now, when these various components are put together in what we call a spiritual bath, they are collected, they are put in traditional containers such as calabashes, buckets, pots, and so forth, and they're added to water, okay? And for those of you who have some background and some knowledge in water, water is the mediator between solids, liquids, and gases. It's a natural solvent. So it's able to break down the various components of some of these materials so that it then is able to be transferred from the organic materials that come from nature. Then these qualities and so forth are then transferred through the bath or through the actual washing of this material on the body. Then these abilities or these qualities or these behaviors that exist within the environment are then able to become transferred to an individual. In this sense, then transferring that particular ability from nature onto oneself. Important step that I don't think has been really explained in detail and in depth, and it's something that's important when it comes to the understanding of what is the structure and what is the purpose of traditional spirituality, or traditional African spirituality, or Aboriginal spirituality, whether it's in the diaspora. And this is important because many people are under the impression that the practice is centered around creating the phenomena of magic, or centered around creating supernatural phenomena, and that's only half of the story. The primary reasoning these traditions, such as Tim and Bukata, traditional medicine, roots, herbs, and magic in the world, soul, and spirit powers of the earth. Our ancestors talk about that this practice of Tim and Bukata was originally designed in order to resurrect flesh and blood beings back into the rightful mind of the Runona, which are the gods of their ancestors that exist in nature. And it was through this science of their knowledge of nature, it was through this science of their knowledge where the different minds and the mentalities, the life in the mind, the personality traits and the qualities and so forth that exist in nature, it was through this knowledge of collecting what we call, this is another definition of Tindana. It means one who collects the spiritual medicines, or what we call Bulana, which the controller of the gods. And I hear this a lot. A person, one priestess one time asked me, how could a person be a controller of the gods? And very simply, through the science of Tim and Bukata, the Tindana or the Bulana or the Gabana has the ability to actually engineer the qualities and the personality traits of the gods themselves. Now, this is an interesting concept because we're talking about spiritual development in a new way. We're not talking about worship, as many have tried to misinform the public as far as traditional African spirituality. We're not talking about worship. And we're not even talking, we're going even further. We're not even just talking about reverence, which I see there are still a lot of traditional concepts that are out there now that people are clinging to. However, they're developed, or they're centered around, or they're even structured around the reverence of the minds, the mentalities, or what we call the Tigamani or the Wudonam, the gods of the ancestors that exist in the nature, or the gods of the land. It's not about reverence. It's actually about the intricate and the secret knowledge of understanding where the traits, the qualities, and the behavior, the life, the mind, and even further, the action of these gods, where it exists in nature, and then even further, how to collect it. And even further from that, moreover, to actually then graft that quality, to graft that behavior onto oneself. Literally then at that point, engineering specific qualities and traits. So this is something that I don't think has really been introduced within traditional knowledge. We've only gotten half the story. Most of us have only, most of you have only been introduced to the reverence aspect of traditional spirituality, or traditional African spirituality, or Aboriginal concepts. You've only been introduced to, or even misinformed about the concepts of worship. However, that is not the primary function of traditional spirituality. The primary foundation of traditional African spirituality, or Aboriginal spirituality, or the science of Timbuktu, is the development of spiritual abilities, and even further, the development of spiritual powers. This is very important, because without this knowledge, you would be misinformed, or you may be led to believe that simply just by cultivating or trying to develop what you would identify as your spiritual qualities through mentalism, and neglecting the fact that the primary source of abilities is, in addition to it being an internal phenomena, it is actually an external phenomena as well, then a person would only get half of the truth. The second half of the truth is, like I'm telling you, is that spiritual abilities have their home and they rest within the various regions, locations, and points that exist within nature. And it is this science that has been able to develop precognition, that is able to develop intuition, that is able to develop psychometry, that is able to develop many of the behaviors that have been labeled or characterized as psychic abilities. This is extremely important. So yes, to answer this question that's coming through the chat now, yes. So I am stating, for the record, I am affirming that spiritual abilities can actually be engineered, not by just meditation, not by chanting. I'm telling you that a person can spend their life meditating. They can spend their life chanting and only develop their abilities to a small degree. However, I am literally suggesting that with the science of Timbuktu, those same abilities can actually be instantly developed by gathering medicine. And this is why I was describing to you before, gathering the components and the parts of nature, and then even further engineering those qualities, engineering those behaviors, and introducing them or grafting them to your body through methods such as the spiritual bath. This is an important thing. This is an extremely important idea, and this is an extremely important perspective for those who have not gotten the chance to really get a proper perspective of traditional spiritual practices from someone such as myself, who's actually qualified to teach this science. So once again, the reason why you are still an amateur at developing spiritual abilities is because most of you do not have the knowledge and do not know that spiritual abilities can be engineered, not just through meditation, not just through chanting, and not through many of the various methods that I'm not speaking bad about these methods. These methods are used by several different cultures all around the world. However, I'm explaining to you that traditional African practices have these exact same methods, in addition to having the understanding that these qualities, these behaviors, and these traits can also be engineered by one's knowledge, by one's intimate knowledge of nature. by one's intimate knowledge of landforms, by one's intimate knowledge of the locations and the regions and the specific points within these landforms. And it is through this knowledge that our ancestors tell the great stories of great clans, such as the Mantembo clan, such as the clans of Shitobu, that literally were clans that were dedicated to engineering the gods themselves. And these were clans that literally traveled to specific locations and regions and points, not just on the continent of Africa, but even throughout the diaspora, and would take pregnant women and women that were ready to birth and to give birth to children, and take women that were in the state of pregnancy or of gestation and so forth, and would take them to these specific landforms in these specific regions, and then create different formulas and spiritual baths and various other methods of traditional medicine, and would literally engineer qualities of the gods in those children through the methods that I've previously stated here. And it is some of these children that have literally created the lore that many of you have heard through the expressions of cultures such as the Greeks and other folklore stories and legends that you've heard about the children that were the children of the gods themselves. Well, what you have not been told is many of these stories, if not all of them, have literally been plagiarized by the knowledge that they know that exists within traditional African spirituality, or within the spirituality of various Aboriginal cultures around the world, where we have the knowledge of how to actually resurrect the gods themselves into their physical forms by grafting not just the gods themselves, but grafting the powers. And this is something that I want to talk about very quickly. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that it goes beyond the concept of worship. We're literally talking about the qualities and the behaviors that give what most people call the gods their abilities, meaning that how the gods move, how they create phenomena, how they even further create phenomenology that then is observed by flesh and blood beings, or even various life forms that exist within the environment. It's having the exact knowledge through the science of Timbuktu, how to actually engineer these qualities, so that then the flesh and blood being then has the exact qualities and has the exact behavior and powers and characteristics as the gods themselves. These are what most people are describing when they talk about themselves being gods, and they quote various religious literature stating how they themselves are gods, without the true knowledge that this is a true science that was actually created. It was actually structured through millions of years of observation and through indirect observation, through modeling, through experimentation. This type of science has been structured. This science is real. It is called Timbuktu. Tima, the traditional medicine, roots, herbs, sticks, magic, and Bukata, the knowledge of the world soul and the spirit powers of the earth and the spirits of protection. This is the science, and this is the science that I'm here to introduce to you in the West through IIKDS, the International Indigenous Knowledge and Development Society, which our goal is to bring this lost knowledge to you. Many of you have been searching for years. You've been searching for years. You've been trying to find the origin or the source of many of the traditional practices that are practiced throughout the diaspora. I'm here to tell you that many of these practices that you are familiar with, many of these practices that you have participated in, are yet the children, or but the children of Timbuktu. This is the ancient knowledge that has structured many of the societies that many people have been enamored with throughout history. This is the science and the teachings and the principle that has structured the practices of ancient Kemet, that has structured the ancient scientific spiritual practices around the world. Timbuktu, the knowledge of traditional medicine, and even further, the knowledge of the world soul and the spirit powers of the earth. So in conclusion, this is the reason why you're still an amateur half truth. Many cultures, many esoteric societies have all tried to describe phenomena such as supernatural phenomena. Many cultures worldwide and many esoteric groups and so forth have tried to talk about the development of these spiritual abilities. But who is talking about where these spiritual abilities originate? They don't talk about that. They don't talk about the knowledge of what we call the Nollywoodni, which is the family star or the star, which is a spiritual reflection or powers that not only exist within an individual, but then also move within that individual's family line. And then shows up within that family line through various individuals that display supernatural abilities or powers, which most people try to label as being psychic. But in the tradition of Tema Bukata, we know that this is truly the star, which is that reflection of nature or the components of nature that is actually moving through the bloodline of these flesh and blood beings that has been there from blood to blood, seed to seed, all the way back to the original seeds, to the original stars, and to the original flesh and blood beings. And like a have moved from the root of the family and have now extended all the way to the branches and to the leaves of this family tree, which are now you as individuals that exist as various branches of your family line. And these powers and these abilities have moved all the way through nature and now exist in many to create phenomena and supernatural phenomenology, or even a phenomena or different events and so forth, and have always been known as the spiritual people in your family. Now is the time for you to know the origin of your spiritual powers. The origin of your spiritual powers does not just exist within yourself, but it also exists within your external environment. And it's through the knowledge of you connecting back to nature, then you will know the true whole. Then you will have a true concept or a true perspective of the holism a God resurrected in the flesh, not because you worship or not because you think of it because of philosophy, because you can actually show it through your action, through your ability to have a connection to not only to your own mind, but also the minds and the mentalities that exist in nature, that exist seemingly in the stationary dimensions of the landforms and ecology and our landscapes and the life forms that exist in nature, what many people have described as totemic identity, but then have their origin within the foundation that has fostered the life of these life forms in different totemic identities and so forth. This is a lost knowledge that I now want to bring to the brothers and sisters in America and throughout the diaspora. It's the knowledge of Tema Bukata. It's the true knowledge of the science of the world soul and the spirit powers of the earth. It's the true knowledge of traditional medicine and how this traditional medicine is the true origin of how to develop spiritual abilities, to not only take the spiritual abilities that you have, but then even further to develop your spiritual abilities to even a greater degree, to a degree that has not yet been explored by many esoteric societies that have still been stuck in the idea of individualism as far as them being the origin of these abilities. When the truth of the matter is that every esoteric science has always talked about the emerging into understanding the totality of all things and merging into nature and so forth. But however, they have yet to explain to you just how and where this emergence is happening. And then even further, what are you connecting to? Many of us have only been given, many of you have only been given an elementary concept of this phenomena. And this is the reason why you are still an amateur at developing spiritual abilities.